it's Sue. Welcome to today's topic, finance, and our focus of the framework on finance. Sorry about the timing of this. It was due yesterday, and who would ever figure that Facebook would go down, right? And it went down 4 minutes before I was supposed to go on live. And I was blaming it on rural internet service and thought really that was what was happening. So then I ran across town to the office to see if maybe there was internet there, and it wasn't the internet. It was Facebook was down. And so it's hard to go live on Facebook when Facebook is down. And I'm not sure that'll ever happen again, or if it has, that was just so random and weird. But anyway, I'm glad that I can be with you here today to cover this topic and really dig into how the framework can help with finance. And so let me know there in the comments if you're here. Also, maybe let me know if finance is something that you think is fun, or maybe finance is something that, you're fearful of. So maybe tell me, is it fun or is it fearful? Or maybe it's both for you. I'm curious to know. So if you can pop that in the comments, I'm curious. Getting to an earlier topic to kind of tee this up, we did a topic in Fans of the Framework during a live about the two big silos in healthcare. That there's this finance or business side of healthcare, and then this service and clinical side of healthcare. And, that these two silos, exist at a macro level maybe, and that really the ideal is that there's a marriage, that these two sides need to really work together to help each other to thrive and be successful. And so we really do believe that if you're going to call yourself a great organization, that means that it's both on the business side, but also on the service and clinical side. And that if you're not great in both, then, really can you be a great organization? Healthcare, we're a service industry, but we're a service industry business, and there is a business to healthcare, right? And so we can have all these great ideals of offering, all these services and great outcomes with great service, but if we can't sustain the business side of it, we're going to have a real struggle to offer the services, good or bad, right? So really, if we're going to call ourselves great, we need to be great in both. So I wanted to really take this opportunity today to dive into how the framework can be focused on the greatness of the business side of the organization. So often when we're talking about greatness and the use of our framework, we're often referring to it as, related to improving the patient experience, quality, service aspects, those types of things. And we get a lot of accolades for helping organizations, get award-winning results in those regard. However, the framework is really a powerful tool for greatness in the entire organization, for both the business side as well as the clinical or service side of the business. And so I wanted to give that some time and attention today, because we're thinking about it. We know the importance of it, but maybe it doesn't come off enough in conversation, in teaching, and in our coaching. So I think the very first time we were really, really enlightened to this was when we first started our company. And so we actually were called into an organization that was building a new hospital, and they said they didn't want to take their old culture and their old patient experience and service aptitude into that new building. So they wanted to also, with new building, new equipment, new technology, they wanted a shiny new infrastructure of people and their behavior around service and teamwork and all of those things. So that's really why they called us in, to be helpful to them and see how the framework could help them create this. Well, when we assessed their organization to develop the plans to make this happen, what we realized was they were in financial crisis, huge financial crisis, and their volumes were declining. They're making a loss every year, etc. And so their financial situation was quite concerning. And so what we knew in that situation was, while it was really important to create this new culture in their organization, running parallel to that, or maybe even with more weight, was what we needed to do to help them with this financial situation, because it was actually going to get in the way of engaging their employees to work on things like service when they're bleeding, money. So it was going to get in the way. It was going to be a barrier if this was not part of the plan. And so for that first year of our partnership with them, they set 3 really big goals, and 2 of them were related to finance and growth, and not about service and people and quality and things of the like, because their crisis, their biggest opportunity, something we had to shore up, was this greatness around finance and growth. So we had to look at how could we use the elements of the framework to assist them in this way. So right out of the gate, when we started working with organizations, we realized that sometimes we get a lot of kudos and credits for being a company that can help, get patient satisfaction to very high award-winning levels, get employee engagement to levels that organizations have never seen or felt before. But truly, the framework can be powerful for the entire business. And I wanted to focus in particular on, reminding you actually, or maybe introducing you, if you're not very familiar with our framework yet, that there's 3 main components to it. And then I want to focus those components on finance today. So the center of our framework is creating strategies. And then the other 2 components are creating alignment to those strategies and ownership for those strategies deep in the whole organization. Aligned and ownership deep at all levels of the organization. But that centerpiece is creating great strategies. And our tactic around that is that they're balanced, that it's narrow and it's balanced. And what I mean by narrow and balanced is that, we have learned that if the organization is focused on 20 things, they'll likely achieve none. So if they're focused to maybe 3 to 7 really, really important things, aspects of their business, core pillars of their business, if they're focused on those very clearly in their strategies, that makes it narrow. And if they can accomplish those, there's a ripple effect into 20 or more things. That's positive. But be very narrow, but then also balanced. And what do I mean by balanced? And what I mean by balanced is that there's a combination of both the financial business growth side of the strategies, but also balanced with the clinical side and the service side of the strategies. And core to all of that, as many of you know, is the people pillar and that strategy. And if anyone wants to work with us to get great results and they don't let us at their people pillar, we don't know how to fix those other pillars. It's such a core thing. But that's a topic for another day. And we talk about that topic a lot, about culture and your people and the employee experience. But, that balance. And so usually organizations that we work with, when creating great strategies, they narrow them down, and then they're balanced across both the business and the clinical or service side of their organization. And so whether that's 5 pillars like people, service, quality, growth, finance, maybe add 6 community, or maybe it's using the IHI triple aim or quadruple aim, which we prefer because it includes the people pillar as well. But in all of that, both there's a balance between this business and this clinical side of the business. So that's what we mean by that. And that's the core. And then from there, we can create alignment and engagement. But really thinking again about these strategies, is what we find in organizations is that often those business pillars, whether it's finance and growth, oftentimes those can become a really core focus of the board and also the senior leadership team in particular. And sometimes out of balance, where they're so focused on that they're not also focused on the people, service, and quality side. And so they get out of balance. They might be strong financially or whatever, but this is not performing well. And like I said, you can't be a great organization if they're both not performing well. So sometimes the organization gets out of balance in its results. They're performing well in one area, but not the other. We were working with an organization across the country to assess their results, and they're really, really doing well financially. They're average at best with service, quality, and their culture. But yet, they're in a situation where they've got some pretty unique opportunities for business success and market share and things like that because of their location. But what I caution them is that because you're out of balance and you're putting all your focus and eggs in this basket, is that I think eventually you're at risk for deteriorating your financial results and position if you don't shore up what's going on in service, people, and quality, right? That this imbalance is eventually going to erode the business side too. Because if you don't have, if you have high turnover, that's costly to your organization because that people side isn't shored up. If your service and quality side isn't shored up, eventually people won't choose you, recommend you to others, etc. They will drive hours away to avoid you. We've experienced that in our own history as leaders. So shoring that up is really, really important, that if we're out of balance. But, we often get really... we see often that organizations can be very focused on finance and growth at maybe the board and executive level at the expense of not focusing enough in balance on those others. And, I see that. You look at board meetings or agendas, and quality service and quality and service are rarely on the agenda. And it's always finance report, always, they have a finance committee, but they don't have a quality committee of the board, really. So that's what I mean by that. But what we also see is that while sometimes the board and the executives can be so heavily focused on finance at the expense of the other, is that we can find that at the departmental leadership level or the middle leadership level, and frontline leadership level, and right down into the employee base, they can be so focused on the service, quality, etc., and they're not enough focused on the finance and growth aspect. So now they're not contributing to the financial success, and they may be actually hurting it, right? So now we got this organization where there's all this disalignment. And it's actually in the hierarchy that there's this unbalance or disalignment. So our framework is really about creating that balance across the strategies, those core pillars, and then making sure that that is aligned through the entire organization. So I'm going to talk about that, from the aspect of how we create that alignment and some tactics for doing that, and also the ownership piece, how we can get kind of everybody aligned and owning. Certainly they should be all the pillars, but today we're talking specifically about finance and growth. And the other thing about that I wanted to mention too is that, when organizations are in crisis in any pillar, maybe they have a quality crisis and a reputation problem and in crisis there, or maybe they're in crisis with their finances, okay? And so let's talk about that related to finance. If an organization is in finance crisis, maybe again, that's just aligned in the organization so that yes, it does have higher importance because of the crisis, yet we still need to stay balanced and not just only focus on that. Because again, it's about both the short game and the long game and the long-term success. And so sometimes we're just, in crisis mode in one pillar, and then we get that subsided, and then there's a fire in another pillar because we didn't stay balanced even during time of crisis. And I do see organizations that are in financial crisis, and it's really hard for them to stay balanced in those other areas, and in the long run it's going to hurt them financially to not keep their employee engagement, their culture, their service, and their quality in that, and keep working on that to get it to a top level, even while they're working through a financial crisis. So that's why we need to engage more people. That's why we need to have this alignment, because it allows us to address crisis, but at the same time, address long-term focus across all pillars. Even though we might put a little more focus on a pillar in crisis, we never stop working on improving those others. So let's talk about, in particular, that creating alignment piece. So I talked about balance, narrow focus, and how sometimes something can be in crisis, like finance. So, what do we do if we want to shore up or strengthen, create greatness in finance? And how can we use these, concepts of the framework and these solutions from the framework to make that happen? So under alignment, one of the core strategies that we use in our partner organizations to create alignment is goals. And it's a goal cycle, and it's a very powerful, robust tactic. And it's a combination of multiple solutions that are gathered together into this rhythm or cycle of setting and achieving goals, okay? And so to create that alignment, you know what the core organization strategies are, and then you cascade that down into organizational goals, and they're narrow and they're focused. So maybe there's a goal for finance, maybe there's a goal for growth, maybe there's a goal for service, maybe there's a goal for engagement, maybe there's a goal for quality. So we've got goals at the organizational level, but then they need to go another level deeper into the organization and align deeper. So what I mean by that is that it needs to get to the departmental level as well, and the service line level. It also needs to get to the employee engagement level across the whole organization. So organizational goals for finance can cascade down to employee-driven teams that focus on that goal for things that need to be done for the whole organization to work on to help contribute to that goal being achieved. And then at the department level, cascading down there to say, what's unique about our department that would allow us to contribute to that goal being successful? So I'll give an example with that. So maybe the organization has under its growth pillar to increase volumes in the organization, increase revenues. Let's say it's revenue. And they've targeted a couple service lines in particular to be able to grow to produce that additional revenue. So they've narrowed the focus to this goal to increase revenue, where they're going to go from X to Y by a certain time, and we're really going to focus on these two service lines and growing them. Well, at the employee-driven level, a community team or a stakeholder team that's assigned very specifically to that can look at how can employees contribute to that across the whole organization. A strategy for that is a tactic called word of mouth, or turning your employees into chief marketing officers. So this employee-driven team could help engage all employees to learn how to promote that service in the community. That it's not just the responsibility of a marketing department, but that every employee is part of the marketing team to get the word out in the community that we do this, and we do it very well, and we encourage you to use our local service, right? So this is one of the things that employee team can actually own and contribute to. Does the marketing department or others in the organization specifically might have their own work to do for the organization to do that? Yes, but this is something that also can contribute. So now we have more horsepower. Now we have more owners. Now we have more alignment, not just in a department like a marketing department. And in those small rural areas, that might be a department of one, right? So they need help. And it's so often that we'll go into a community and we'll ask them, what can your hospital do to serve you better? And they'll say, oh, we wish our hospital did this, this, and this. And by golly, they do. The community doesn't even know it. So if you create an employee-wide effort, especially aligned with those key areas that you're intentionally planning to grow, that's going to contribute to your organization's success in that pillar, you can intentionally, very specifically, very, strategically engage employees to be part of that success. And employees will feel proud to be part of the team that created a win like this for their organization, to strengthen it in this way. It's good for them too. It's good for their community where they live and where they work. So that's a way to align, but also down at the departmental level. So you might go to each department and say, what's uniquely, in your wheelhouse that you can contribute to make sure we can grow this service line? What's unique to you in registration? What's unique to you in surgery? What's unique to you in inpatient? What's unique to you in the lab? What is it specifically you need to do that not other people, it's unique to you that you can contribute? So now if we have the teams over here doing this, the marketing department or administration doing this, maybe they need to recruit some doctors, maybe they need to add some technology or whatever, and they're doing their part organizationally, then at the department level, we got this thing going on, right? So when that happens, look at the horsepower you've got. Look at all of this alignment you've got working towards that one goal to grow revenue, to grow volumes, and specifically identified where we're going to do that. And then we can all say, how are we going to do that? How are the employee teams going to contribute? How is administration? What's unique to us that we need to contribute? What do we need to do as individual departments to contribute? And we can cascade through the goal cycle very specific measurements that said, did we do that well? So if the organization wants to increase it by X, then we can, everyone say, I'll do this, I'll do this. And if collectively we all do it, we should be able to achieve X, right? Where in isolation, if it's just set to one project team of leaders and administration, you're not going to have enough horsepower, folks. There just isn't going to be enough horsepower to set big goals. You're going to make millimeters of progress towards, a few small things. No, if you want to make big sweeping improvement, you need more horsepower and you need alignment to do that. And you need to align it in organizational level that engages employees, and in department levels that engages those leaders and those employees. And now we have more horsepower. And that goal cycle, which is in that alignment part of the framework, is your power to doing that. The other thing related to that is in times of crisis, maybe you'd put your goal cycle together and maybe you have a system for evaluating people, employees, leaders related to whether or not those goals were attained. And, maybe there's a numerical weighted system regarding that. So maybe in times of crisis, you weight those goals related to finance and growth a little bit heavier because we're in crisis. And so it puts more importance, more sense of urgency on that in the organization. The other thing I wanted to mention about that crisis piece is, our counter to that is you can set bigger goals, you can engage more people, you can engage teams, you can engage departments to contribute, and you can weight those higher related to how we evaluate our outcomes individually and collectively in a year, and that's all part of the goal cycle. But what I wanted to mention about that crisis piece is that oftentimes when there is a pillar in crisis like finance, is that sometimes we can get into, this feeling of hopelessness and maybe even pessimism regarding that. And, that's not going to be helpful in your efforts. Even though there's a sense of urgency around that and there is crisis around that, we're not trying to hide that. You want to be transparent about that. But I think by offering up to the organization this really clear plan about how we're going to get at it and how it's not just going to be the board or senior leaders that are going to get at it, that we all have the ability to contribute to that becomes very positive and empowering. That people feel like they're just not victim to the crisis and they can't do anything about it, but they actually can contribute. But if we don't give thought to how to organize the contributions, then we don't give our employees, we don't give our frontline leaders usually an opportunity where they can really be participants in overcoming the crisis and having success. And again, you might need a short-term strategy for things and some really quick actions because you're in crisis. And again, not just doing them alone at the senior leadership level or the board level, but doing them in an employee engaged, aligned process. So you have those quick actions aligned with sense of urgency, but then you also have that long game plan that we're going to keep working on some really core things that are going to strengthen us over the long term. So we're going to we're going to stop the bleeding through one set of actions, and then we're going to maintain our health and fix it long term through another set of actions. And both sets of these actions can be done through this process of alignment by engaging frontline leaders and employees through employee-driven efforts and teams, and then also engaging departments for both those ideas that are short-term but also long-term fixes. So I kind of mentioned that you can create a team over here of employees and have employee-driven efforts. And oftentimes, in our partner organizations, we have some core teams: the employee experience team, the patient experience team, the nursing or clinical team, the employee training team. Those are real core teams in our partner organizations. But then we also align that employee-driven structure with what are the core strategies or needs of the organization. And so some of our partners do have employee-driven finance teams. And so it's an employee-driven effort to contribute to that. And like I said, sometimes it's the community team or a growth team that's really focused on things related to helping the organization increase revenue. Because really, when you think about it, at the most basic level, how we improve finances, we either improve revenue, increase revenue, decrease expenses, or both. That's just really the simplest equation for improving even your home budget. You increase your income or you decrease your expenses, or both, and you'll have money for savings, right? Or money left over. And that's true in any business, is increase revenue, decrease expenses, or both. So in some organizations, they set goals for both: increasing revenue, decreasing expenses. So growth goal, increasing revenue; expense goal is under the finance goal. And I would encourage you, if you do that, for the sake of understanding and ease and work in your organization, is to set those goals by actual numbers and not percentages. I was working with a partner to set their goals for this year, and everything was in percentages. We want to increase patient satisfaction by 2%, or we want to increase revenue by 3%, or we want to decrease expenses by 4%. Well, I'd put a real number to that, right? A real number, so that people know that's $1 million, or that's $2 million, or that's $600,000. And then when you're giving them updates about the score, about how you're doing, it's more understandable. It's hard to say, oh, we went up 0.5%, or we went down 0.5. Well, if we know we want to go up $1 million, use the numbers. It makes it so more understandable. People want to keep score. They want to know if the plans are working. They want to know if we're winning or we're losing. And if you're using percentages, I find that employees and leaders and others get confused by that. So that's a tidbit too. But think about aligning under that pillar of alignment, aligning your goals at the organizational level, department level, and then maybe aligning your team structure of employee-driven teams to include finance and growth. So some other solutions that we use related to the framework that are tucked into the framework are under ownership. And one of them is related to the employee experience team, and they often are responsible for maybe a suggestion program in the organization. And in a lot of organizations, those are kind of dead, or it's a box that's tucked by the cafeteria and only has food items, suggestions in it. But, a real robust suggestion program is a great way to allow employees to contribute to the organization's success. And you can do that to create ownership and also alignment. That one tactic can create both ownership and alignment. So an idea there is to use a themed approach. So if you have a big goal related to increasing revenue or decreasing expenses, you can make your employee suggestion program completely aligned with that and promote it as the place where employees can make suggestions, not just about general things like the food in the cafeteria, but real important things like how can we decrease expenses? It was out of one of those suggestion programs that was very targeted, very aligned to the organization's financial crisis that, somebody came up with an idea to get rid of all the water coolers that somehow had surfaced over years in the organization. And, basically, the vendor locally had a full-time person just delivering more water and more water and more bottled water to the hospital at great expense, tens of thousands of dollars. Well, that would save the layoff of one person. And it was an employee that suggested that. They started to fear, was there going to be layoffs because we're in financial crisis? And so the employee suggestion program was aligned with that and said, wow, if we can come up with enough ideas that save X amount of money, then we have that money that we don't have to cut from salaries and labor, because that's our biggest expense, salary and labor. So the idea here is that, again, we have alignment with an employee suggestion program, that it's not generic. It's highly focused, it creates ownership, and it's done in alignment. It could be about transparency. So one of the tactics about creating ownership is to be more transparent. How can people own finance if they don't see any information about finance? And then we don't tell them how they can help, like through a suggestion program. So transparency is another aspect of helping and being creating ownership. So, we had one CEO that said to us, my employees just can't take this bad news. I just don't want to bring them down about this, right? By sharing this, and it might create panic and crisis. But how can they help you? Through great suggestions, by joining one of these teams, by helping their department meet its goals. If they don't have the information to know how are we really doing and how much do we need to improve. So that transparency is really about being honest with your people, making it understandable, again, using numbers, not percentages maybe, and putting it out there. Don't wait till your numbers are good to be transparent about how you're doing. Sometimes we just need to own it where it's at, whether that's in finance, patient satisfaction, or the like. Also, you can use the tactics of building relationships and build them around your finances and your growth goals. So the tactic of leaders rounding with their employees, ask customized questions about, our department has a goal to improve revenue in this way or expenses in this way. Let's talk about that. What do you see? How are we doing with it from your perspective? What do you see as opportunities? So when we engage in these one-on-one, very powerful conversations with our employees, and we align those very specifically to what it is we're trying to accomplish, we end up engaging them and creating them as owners and partners in this. That it's not just stuff we as leaders talk about, but we talk about it with our employees. We engage them in it. And we ask questions of them, and we engage them in helping us problem solve around that. And we can do it through our tactics of employee rounding. So having a customized question about finance or growth, if you have big goals for that or crisis in that area, would be helpful. And when leaders focus in conversation with employees about anything, whether it's safety, a culture, whatever, we remind them that it's important, right? We just by engaging and taking the time and truly asking the questions and truly listening and acting on what we learn. So those are some things that, create alignment and ownership. So it's not just the board, it's just not the executive team that is responsible for the business running well and having great financial results, great revenue, reasonable expenses. But in the long game, I think there's a long game related to this as well in finances. I think we need to invest in our leaders in teaching them how to manage finance. I know that a lot of leaders, I was a leader of leaders for a lot of years, and I promoted a lot of leaders from within, tapped the best clinicians on the shoulders and promoted them to leadership. They had never managed a multi-million-dollar budget before. They didn't know what expense per patient day meant. They didn't know what a variance on an expense report meant or how to decipher what to do about it, etc., right? There's a lot of learning that needs to happen there. And I would say there's, in my assessment, a huge deficit there. That organizations, we might train our leaders to how to do payroll, how to buy things, etc. But are we really training them to be, really good and strong in these areas of finance? And whether you're a clinical leader or not. I think, I believe that, we sometimes think that it's maybe not in the realm of the clinical leaders, yet they might have the biggest amounts of revenue and expenses running through their departments. So, and maybe they're really uncomfortable with that aspect of their leadership. So we need to invest in leadership development about what it means to be able to manage your finances and be good stewards of our resources. Also, I do believe we need to invest in our culture, and that's part of the long game about being accountable to financial results, etc. Is that, if your culture crumbles and your service experience crumbles and your quality crumbles, I do think long term, even if you're doing well financially now, you're at risk. Maybe not short term, but long term. Okay? So if your patients don't choose you, right? Maybe that's not today, but if it keeps going in that wrong trend, even though you're having good revenue, expenses, volumes now, you're at risk. Because eventually they won't choose you. They will drive 90 miles around, the other way to seek care if you're not the greatest. And your culture matters, your service matters, your quality matters. And if you don't do those things well, eventually, no matter how well you're doing in finance, it's going to hurt you. And it could be the thing that actually helps you long term, right? It's the thing that actually helps you long term. And then lastly, I think that when we run a really well-balanced, well-run organization, where we have these engines humming, where we have organization-wide efforts and employee-driven teams and efforts that are really aligned and working towards organization priorities, and then we have the same going on at the department level, where we're really focused on our departmental contributions. When we get this humming and balanced across finance, people, service, quality, and growth, and we really get this humming, then I really believe that day-to-day operations, and I see this and I believe it to be true because I've seen it, is that when we can get day-to-day operations humming to get really great results, and chaos and the whirlwind calms down because our employees and our leaders are engaged in new ways to manage day-to-day operations, to see it through, to continue to make it better, that it does free up time for senior leaders and boards to focus on what's going on outside the organization and those longer term strategies, so they can focus outside and long term across, again, that balanced approach. And I find that when the organization is not well tuned, not well running day to day, with, and it's very reactive to the crisis of the day, the firefighting of the day, etc., that senior leaders have to be so focused on that they can't be focused on the long game. They can't be focused on what's going on outside, and that puts them also at great risk. They're at risk for their organization being negatively impacted long term because they had to be so narrowly internally focused on day-to-day operations and not on focusing on moving the organization forward and responding to external changes and threats. And that will affect their financial position for sure, right? We know that. Things are always coming at us to affect our financial position from the outside. Regulatory changes, the processes of how to even bill and collect, all of that stuff, competition, you name it, it's coming at us, it's circling around us. But as a senior leader, if we have to be so focused on just day-to-day things because we haven't developed our leaders, we haven't engaged our employees, then we are at risk as well. So many challenges to running a great healthcare organization, and it's certainly why we know that organizations need a framework for this. They need strategies behind this, and they need tactics. And they don't need to do the trial and error. I can tell you that it took 2 years of research for us to develop this, and now it's taken another 7+ years to study and adjust this. And so, most organizations don't have time to figure it out. They just need a plan, and they need to go. They need a strategy that they need to go with, and they need to make it work. And so, the call to action today is, if you're one of those organizations where your results are out of balance, or you're at risk because you're out of balance, or you're in crisis in any pillar, or maybe you're just good or average in every pillar, and you don't know what to do to make that better, we know the power of the framework. We know that creating balanced strategies, that creating alignment, creating ownership in the tactics to do that, we know they can create amazing results, and they are part of a long-term strategy. It's not a quick fix. It can be used in a quick fix fashion, but also it's paralleled with the long game, which keeps your organization stable and running into the future. So if you need help with that, as an organization, you could go to capstoneleadership.net and to our website there, and there's a spot right there to book a call with us, and we can talk about whether or not your situation and how you're currently operating, how you're creating strategies, and how you're bringing them to life. We can talk about how that's working for you, and we can talk about whether the framework would be a good fit for your organization, and that maybe we could partner with you to be able to assess very specifically how to apply the framework to your organization. And so capstoneleadership.net is our website, and there's a place right there to book a call, and we would encourage you to do that. So have a great rest of your week. I'm glad we finally got to go live on this topic, and it's an important one for our healthcare organizations and the communities that we serve in, because I said it before, is I don't want to be part of the leadership team that loses an important asset such as this to its community because we couldn't figure this stuff out. And there's been a lot of news this past week about healthcare organizations, especially in rural areas, how they're having to downsize services, maybe even close their facilities, and communities are losing access with great impact. And I think that some of that, maybe most of it, is preventable. And I think the framework is part of that answer, and I believe that to be true. So if you're interested in learning more about our framework and whether it's right for your organization, again, capstoneleadership.net, book a call. Thanks so much.